To develop the discussion further, which Deputy Lossev has the floor.
I think this question is directly related to the subject which we just touched now by Senator Nunn. We have heard for many years Washington demands about the control measures, very strict ones, including the on-site inspection, and saying that these controls were insufficient. The American side had refused to take part in these negotiations and refused to be part of the moratorium. Now, when the Soviet Union had told about the very strict verification, including on-site verification, who agreed with that, without the refusal to do that, now the White House is retreating. And the U.S. delegation, during Geneva negotiations, received instructions to what causes this sort of a reversal of American position in the verification question. Perhaps Pentagon would like to have inspection teams in all Krasnoyarsk intersections, in all the street intersections. But they don't want to see any Soviet observers in Nevada. Perhaps the present administration in the United States, does it really want to have these strict controls? Or were these proposals just tactical maneuvers and just attempts to reach a deal?
Well, as Congressman Lott probably comes closer than anybody on this panel to representing the President's view in the Congress, we'll ask him to think about that for a couple of minutes. But I must confess that, like you earlier, Leonid, I now have to tell the audience that we'll be back in just a moment.
What's it like to be the first kid on the block to try the new Kodak Ultralife battery, the longest-lasting 9-volt ever? Well, you won't have to remember it's made of lithium and tipped with gold, or remember it lasts twice as long. You just have to remember to change it, which in this case is in the year 2001. Kodak introduces Ultralife batteries, twice the life when you go for the gold.
Build me an engine that can carry me home, light my darkness, make me smile. GE, we bring good things to life. Be there in the morning, show me all there is to see. Turn my happy moments into sweet memories. GE, we bring good things to life.
How do you treat a person with a disability?
I'm not quite sure how to deal with a disabled person. No different from anyone else.
Treat them just as human beings.
Disabled doesn't mean non-normal.
I treat them as I would treat any other human being. I should treat them probably as normal people, but with special needs.
I'm Tony Danza. United Cerebral Palsy knows there's only one answer to that question. How do you treat a person with a disability? Like a person.
If your car's engine were to stop, you probably know what to do to get it started again. The sad fact is, more people know how to jumpstart a car than know how to save a life. Learn how to jumpstart a life. Learn Red Cross CPR.
You've probably heard about osteoporosis, how it causes bones to become weak and break easily as you get older, especially if you're a woman. And you may have heard about adding calcium to your diet, but did you know research shows there are other ways you can keep your bones strong? You can avoid smoking, heavy drinking, and get regular exercise. If you're over 45, talk to your doctor about other things you can do. Get the facts about osteoporosis in this free booklet from the Arthritis Foundation, and call your local office today.
It is estimated that the United States and the Soviet Union annually spend a combined total of $500 billion on defense. There are approximately 50,000 nuclear weapons in the combined U.S.-Soviet arsenals, with an explosive force of approximately 20,000 megatons. With the world population having just exceeded the 5 billion mark, that megatonnage represents 4 tons of TNT for every man, woman, and child alive today. startling statistics, and it is in part the subject. Congressman Trent Lott of Mississippi.
Well, the question had to do with the discussion of verification of what is happening in Russia or in the United States. We agree, obviously, verification is very important. It's very difficult, very complex issue to deal with, and I really don't think that we could begin to address that here and shouldn't. This is something that needs to be worked out during the arms control INF negotiations, and it's going to be subject to a lot of very intense negotiations. But again, I'd like to turn the tables here and put the question.
Before you do, can I apologize? The questioner inferred that as the Soviets began to give more access for verification, that the Reagan administration backed away from agreements. Agree with that?
I don't think I'm in a position to really respond to that, because I have not been a part of those negotiations. I'm not a member of the Armed Services Committee. I like to think of myself as being on this panel as a citizen legislator, and that's why I keep trying to get to questions I think that the average citizens in America and the Russian people are very much concerned about.
Peter,
and
for a long time, let me just interject just a minute, the Soviets for a long time wouldn't even talk about on-site inspection. For a long time, we demanded on-site inspection, and still do, on INF, on chemical weapons, and others. Now the Soviets, and we're gratified by this, they're doing a lot more talk about on-site inspection, although we haven't pinned down the agreements. And we are beginning to move back a little bit more towards a more targeted on-site inspection rather than going anywhere at any time. So the good news is that both sides are beginning to move towards each other on this verification question.
And do you agree that both sides are moving towards each other on this question of massing tanks?
No, I do not. Not at this time. That's the challenge I threw out to the Soviets. I think if they are concerned about our first use policy in NATO of nuclear weapons, then they can ease that policy a great deal, perhaps even change it by agreeing under strict interpretations not to mass their tank armies, which is what gives us the problem to begin with.
Peter, I thought one of the things we were supposed to do in this program was to find out.
Members of Congress. But we would also like to take part in it if we could, and we would like to express our viewpoints, namely Academician Villikov.
First place, I would like to ask about concrete facts and not just idle talk. The administration of the United States, and I wrote especially about this, as not giving visas to Soviet scientists to work at the test site in Nevada. That is a fact, and I'd like to know your view about this particular fact. This is at a time when American scientists are working in Semipalatinsk in the Soviet Union. And I'd also like to continue the discussion about aggressive and peaceful demonstrations the Soviet Union has, since 1983, followed a unilateral moratorium on nuclear tests for a year and a half. There was a moratorium on all nuclear explosions, and I'm wondering how you feel about these particular facts, and what chances are there that the United States will go to total elimination of nuclear weapons, or at least limiting to weapons of a single kiloton.
Dr. Villikov, I'm not sure who can answer the first question. Can you, Congressman Aspen, about denying visas?
Yeah, no, I don't know about
not about the visa question.
Okay.
No.
Can't answer the first part of the question. As to the second part about agreement on a nuclear test ban treaty, Congressman Aspen?
Well, as Dr. Villikov knows, because we have talked about this in several forums, the United States citizens are divided on the issue of nuclear testing moratoriums. There are some people who favor it very strongly. Other people think that that is not in our national interest, and that given the necessity to rely on nuclear weapons, that it's important to continue testing for reliability, for safety, and for other reasons. I think that the United States and the Soviet Union agreed just recently to begin nuclear testing discussions, and it looked like a very good forum. I would guess that at this point we can say that those issues will now go forward as part of the general arms control discussions that will be taking place in the post-INF arms talks.
Congressman Lott, you have said on a couple of occasions here that you feel yourself sort of representing the common man as opposed to these two experts on arms control. Can you explain to the Soviets why Americans are so passionate about verification? And can you also explain whether or not you think this discussion is going anywhere?
Well, it gets to the question, as I said originally, about concern of can we trust them and are they credible? American people, I think the Congress of the United States feels that there are violations of the ABM treaties, and the American people feel very strongly about violations of the Helsinki Accords. So let me put it in a positive question. In view of the efforts to try to open up and be in better communication and have a better relationship with the United States, this so-called glasnost, are we going to see, speaking of visas, are we going to see some opening up in the human rights area with regard to the Jewish refuseniks and the spouses and people being able to enter and leave? And what about the political prisoners? Are there going to be some signals from within the Soviet government that they are taking steps to open up their government?
Leonid, which member of your panel would like to address that?
Peter.
Дело вот в чем. Значит, я хотел бы обратить внимание,
I would like to draw attention, distinguished participants in the discussion on the American side, that in our forthcoming space bridges there are going to be such questions as regional conflicts, human rights and so on. I think this is this could be answered by anybody, not only the specialists sitting here, but anybody sitting in the audience as well. Nevertheless, Deputy Tolkunov would like to speak about this, and then Marshal Arkhomiev would like to express his viewpoint.
I simply, in answer to your question, would like to answer very briefly. We indeed think that normal relations leading to peace cannot continue if there are human rights violations, but we need to go further. We need to see, we need to look, we need to see perfectly clearly that human rights to a definite extent are being violated in the West as well. For example, in the US, 16 of the 19 conventions adopted by the United Nations on Human Rights have not yet been ratified. Such important conventions as the economic and political human rights. We need to have a shared common legal basis for questions on human rights. We need to have these that will give a basis for this work when everyone is a party to the treaty. The Soviet Union right now has done a great deal and is continuing to do a great deal to comply with human rights. And I think that the next space bridge, which will be entirely devoted to the topic of human rights, will give an idea both to American and Soviet TV viewers as to what the situation is in this extremely important field.
Thank you very much. Sergei Fyodorovich.
I would like to put a question to Senator Nunn. Among all the problems of arms limitation and reduction, the most important one is the reduction of strategic offensive arms. But it is indissolubly linked with the fact that the ABM Treaty remains in force, and the fact that it should remain in force as it was signed in 1972. The ABM Treaty is what we term its narrow interpretation. At the present, the U.S. administration is trying to give it another interpretation, which in the United States is called a broad interpretation. But that broad interpretation is really a violation of the treaty. We would like the American people to know that the Soviet Union and the Soviet people will never agree to such a broad interpretation, will never agree that the ABM Treaty should be scrapped. If it's scrapped, well, then there cannot be any agreement on reduction of strategic arms. I would like to ask, what is the probability that the narrow interpretation of the treaty, the ABM Treaty, will be upheld in the United States by the United States administration, so that that will help bring about a 50% reduction of strategic arms?
Which was ratified by the United States in '72, that one.
Senator Nunn is exactly the right person to ask, Marshal Arkhomiev, because that's to the heart of Star Wars and the Strategic Defense Initiative?
Well, let me make just a few points, and hopefully very briefly here. Number one, I think both sides are going to have some understanding about what the ABM Treaty means before either side can afford to go forward with reducing offensive weapons. There is a definite link between offense and defense. And if you cut down your offensive threat against this country, then we should basically adjust the pace and the scope of our defensive efforts. That was the heart of the ABM Treaty, and it's still the heart of arms control. You have to have that link between offense and defense. Second, we passed a provision in the United States Senate last week. We had a disagreement with the administration on this point, and we prevailed by 58 to 38, saying that the United States Senate is a partner in treaties to the extent that the President of the United States cannot reinterpret a treaty without coming back to the Congress. Now, the Congress may be persuaded, the House and the Senate may be persuaded that the President is right on the broad interpretation. I'm not persuaded of that at this stage, but we are going to try to insist that the Congress be a partner, because a treaty to us is a very important document. The Senate has to ratify a treaty by 2/3 vote. And we believe that under our Constitution, a treaty becomes the law of the land and cannot be changed without the Congress approving that. Now, the problem is that the Soviets have taken a very rigid interpretation of the ABM Treaty. You have said in Geneva, and perhaps continue to say, I'm not sure exactly what the status is now, that purposeful research is barred. We don't agree with that. So I don't agree with the Soviet definition, but neither do I agree with the administration broad reinterpretation. And I think the answer, as I see it, is when all else fails, both superpowers should go back and read the directions. And if they read the directions on this ABM treaty, perhaps we can indeed tie offense to defense and get some kind of agreement that will help alleviate the instability in the world.
Senator Nunn, thank you. Perhaps when we come back, Moscow, in just a couple of minutes, we can talk about the real possibility or lack of possibility of having serious reductions in offensive strategic nuclear weapons, perhaps in 5 years. We'll be back in just a moment.
Live from the Kremlin and Capitol Hill, ABC News Capital to Capital will continue in a moment.
Do something. Anything.
You say you want a revolution. Well, you know, we all want to change the world. You know it's gonna be all right. All right. All right.
The dream of success. You can see it in the eyes of people all across America. At Citicorp, we understand the dream and the hard work, the passion, the commitment that Americans pour into it. That's why we're committed to helping people turn their dreams into reality. Today, as Citicorp and Citibank, we're America's largest financial services organization, already helping 1 in every 5 families across the nation, with more home mortgages, more student loans, more MasterCard and Visa cards than any other company. If you have a dream of success, we can help it take shape. We'd like you to get to know us better. Citicorp, because Americans want to succeed, not just survive.
I want you so bad that I can't stand it. Lust.
I'm gonna catch you. What can I do to satisfy you?
Can Lucy bring Tony from passion into love?
That's what you want to, isn't it?
On General Hospital.
Thursday, are jocks turning to crime? Call Sledgehammer.
You're supposed to hurt the one you love, not murder him.
Then it's the American way.
We got our credit card!
The Charmings discover the power of plastic. Then...
Something strange in your neighborhood.
Dan Aykroyd, Sigourney Weaver.
Take me now.
And Bill Murray.
We never talk anymore.
The network television premiere of Ghostbusters, all starting at 8/7 Central Thursday.
While we have been in a commercial break, Soviet television, which has an audience for this particular program of about 120 million people, we are told, has been playing some of our commercial messages in the Soviet Union. Not altogether sure what effect they will have had, but it is yet another opportunity for us to exchange information. Leonid?
Well, I think we should continue our discussion, because although the time has been extended, I think there are many problems. And in this connection, I should like to give the floor once again to Mr. Kornienko.
One particular question I'd like to answer, put by Senator Nunn. The Soviet Union has clearly and distinctly formulated its position on the ABM Treaty in Geneva and now in Washington during the visit of our foreign minister, and this position does not provide for a prohibition on research. So your idea of that isn't quite accurate. I'd now like to come back to the question of trust. What is the source of mistrust? This was touched on once again by Congressman Lott in his answer to the question of the U.S. moderator. I think to a large extent, mistrust and misimpressions in the minds of Americans about the Soviet Union today simply stem from poor knowledge of us. Knowledge of the Soviet Union and even recent history. I'd like to give you an example. Your American press only recently published a story to the effect that the answer to the questionnaire conducted by the New York Times, 43% of those asked whether the Soviet Union in the Second World War fought together with Germany and against the United States. They thought that. 28% answered accurately, but 28% simply said they didn't know, quite frankly. This level of knowledge about the Soviet Union, to think that we were on the same side as Hitler's Germany during the last war, of course causes mistrust towards the Soviet Union. But why this poor level of knowledge? Unfortunately, and here today we're hearing from American participants in this program, and these are people of authority, we've heard a lot of inaccurate ideas about the Soviet Union. In the circumstances, we cannot be surprised that the average American shares these inaccurate impressions. So let's get together more, let's get to know each other better, and get to know each other better. And so try to dispel this mistrust. I don't say that I agree with everything that's been said by our citizens who were shown in the first roll-in. Certainly there are inaccurate misimpressions there too. But the extremities we've been meeting in the ideas, unfortunately, in the minds of many American citizens about the Soviet Union, I don't think you'll meet such extreme misimpressions in the minds of our people.
Would you like to ask a question? Evgeny Pavlovich?
I wanted to ask Senator Nunn a question. I understood from the discussion at the present time, because of the problem of nuclear testing, the question of control is considered a solved question. But there are other factors which prevent the conclusion of this agreement. In recent discussions with a number of scientists and military representatives of the United States, the view was expressed that the cruise missiles cannot be limited because we cannot test the presence for crude missiles on ships, that is to say. So is this just a question of verification? And if the question of verification could be solved, would it be possible to resolve the question of limiting this type of weapon, cruise missiles, which, as I see it, are extremely dangerous?
Peter?
Senator,
before we get into another discussion of the nuclear systems, I'd like to respond to the comment that was made before this getting back into the military side of it. I think that that was a very important point. I think there is a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding by the people in our respective countries, and that's the whole idea of this very program. I think that more communication, more meetings, more discussions, more exchange, more cooperation perhaps in areas like space, culture, sports, wherever we can do these things, I think we certainly should do it. And that's why I hope that these programs will continue to try to educate the people in both countries that they may not be getting right now. For instance, I understand that while there's very positive things being said about arms control, at the same time there's very strong anti-American stories appearing in the printed media in Russia every day. So we need to use this type of communication to try to get to the people in our respective countries.
One of the things, Congressman, I apologize just 1 second, because I think there's maybe an issue of real misinterpretation here, maybe not. Mr. Kornienko, it is the impression in my ear of one of our interpreters listening here that in your brief statement there you said for the first time to some ears here that the Soviet Union has abandoned its opposition to the Strategic Defense Initiative. If that is what you said to the research into the Strategic Defense Initiative, if that is the case, that will be widely of great interest in the United States. Would you like to clarify that?
Insofar as concerns research on Earth, in Reykjavik, our side mentioned this, and you're not hearing any revelations about that today. And the position which was set forth officially around the negotiating table in Geneva, and I repeat, in Washington also, quite recently, just a few days ago, quite clearly and distinctly show that we do object to the conducting of a certain category of tests, putting devices of a certain kind into space. But against research as such, we have no objection. But that does not mean that we agree with the SDI program. The very program itself, SDI, is by no means a research program. And the tests, incidentally, which were announced by the Secretary of Defense Weinberger, is that really research? This is really testing, and in space at that. And I'd like to know, incidentally, how Senator Nunn, who has a very firm position, and I think he has a very correct position, who is against a broad interpretation of the treaty, how he sees the situation. Does he feel that what was announced by Weinberger, the tests announced, does he think that's a narrow interpretation?
Just before we continue, can I warn the ABC affiliates across the country that we are rapidly approaching the end of our scheduled time, but we are going to continue this discussion, so can we tell you all across the country we're going to go on. Congressman Aspin, before we go to Senator Nunn, did you hear anything new from the Soviets on their position about SDI?
I had another point. Why don't you ask Senator Nunn about this? We've got about 3 conversations going. But
I would say that the Soviet position on what is permitted under ABM and what is permitted with SDI program has evolved, and it has evolved towards the traditional interpretation. I don't think they're there yet, but they are moving in that direction, and if we could both agree on that interpretation and then get down to the ambiguities within that interpretation, even once you agree on what we call traditional interpretation, you still have a lot of ambiguities. I won't go into the technical details, but it's time for us to sit down in Geneva and go into those definitions and the ambiguities.
Congressman Aspin.
Just to follow up on the point again that Mr. Kornienko was making and that Congressman Lott was talking about, and that is the need for more discussions, which I agree. But I fundamentally disagree with Mr. Kornienko's premise of his statement. The premise seemed to be that the mistrust between our country and the Soviet Union was due to ignorance in the United States about what's going on in the Soviet Union. I believe there is a great deal of lack of knowledge in this country about the Soviet Union, and we would like to correct that. But to say that the issue of trust comes from that ignorance, I think, is not correct. I think that the people who know the most about the Soviet Union do not feel any more trustful about the Soviet Union than the people who don't know very much about it, and for very, very good reasons.
Congressman, thank you very much. We're going to take another break now, and when we come back, we are going to hear some more questions from the members of our audience. We'll be right back.
Live from the Kremlin and Capitol Hill, ABC News Capital to Capital will continue in a moment.
It's not just that it's ocean spray and that it's good for you. It's that you've never tasted anything like it. The taste of sweet blueberries and the special goodness of tart cranberries. Together at last. Cran blueberry, blueberry cranberry drink from Ocean Spray. Taste it and you're sure to fall in love. Cran blueberry. It's good for you, America. From Ocean Spray.
Would you like to have something sweet?
What you got there? Nothing.
It'll be my treat.
My mom doesn't let us have stuff like that. My mom does.
Something you and your kids can agree on. Something with NutraSweet instead of sugar.
Would you like to have something sweet?
So do you think you could have your mom talk to my mom?
They come from near and far with names like Bill, Frank, and Joanne. But they all share the same initials, G.E.
Cheers. On your TV. We're perfect strangers. And friends like us. Problems? God bid ridiculous. Then it's headed to class. Oh, we got straight A's. We want to change the world. For a child that pays. Perfect strangers. Head of the class. Wednesday nights on ABC. Ha! Gotcha!
Hi, Mr. McKay.
Hello.
Sports reaching heights. Everybody shifting gears, that's right. ABC Sports reaching new heights.
This ABC News exclusive is being brought to you by General Electric. Once again from Washington, Peter Jennings.
We said we wanted to take questions from the audience. It is fitting that we invite Congressman Brown from California to ask a question, as he is the chairman, if I'm correct, of the steering committee, which really was the inspiration behind this Congress to Supreme Soviet dialogue. Congressman Brown?
Thank you, Peter. I've been listening to this discussion on the military aspects of security with some interest. It depresses me a little, and it has for the last 20 years that I've listened to it, and I'm inclined to feel more sympathy with the position that Congressman Lott made, that we need to look for some constructive engagement. And I'd like to ask Professor Velikov one question. He almost got to this question earlier in the program. What are the possibilities of cooperative agreements in which the United States and the Soviet Union could work together as a means of reducing some of these insecurities? And I'll be more specific. Here in the Congress, there's considerable discussion of the possibility of a major joint space enterprise, such as the exploration of Mars. What would be the Soviet reaction to that? Would it help to have such a venture together to reduce our mutual insecurities and build confidence in each other?
Thank you for your question. Academician Velikov will answer. I apologize, Congressman. I wished to present you to the viewers. Congressman George Brown is the head of the Initiative Committee in Congress, which belongs the Initiative for organizing this entire series. Evgeny Pavlovich.
First of all, I would like to note, it seems to me that in order to increase confidence, there are considerable possibilities for cooperation. Concretely, cooperation in the most acute questions for the question of nuclear disarmament and control over disarmament. I have in mind that it would be very useful, namely the work which is being done by the Academy of Sciences with the Council for Protection of the Environment on control over nuclear explosions, the work which we're starting now with the Federation of American Scientists, and I'm talking about the old idea which 5 years ago seemed to us like a dream, namely that we have to be able to control the production of nuclear warheads and also nuclear explosive material to make sure that it goes into peaceful purposes, not into warheads. Also questions related to the control over the weight, the payload of weapons sent into space. This is very important also for confidence. A question also of determining whether or not there are nuclear warheads located on ships. I raised this question with Senator Nunn a moment ago, the question of cruise missiles on ships. Now, as far as major projects are concerned, there are a number of these constructive projects in the works now, such as the joint creation of a thermonuclear tokamak reactor. We've already proceeded to this after reaching agreement in Geneva, and in fact we're jointly designing this, the United States and the USSR and Western Europe as well, and Japan. It seems to me that we could, this was a very good example of our cooperation, which reduces lack of confidence. And as far as space is concerned, the number of possibilities there for the use of contemporary technology for communication in space and for investigation of natural resources in the environment and also for scientific research generally.
Dr. Velikov?
Therefore, I'm a great enthusiast for the development of joint scientific efforts aimed at improving confidence and solving major issues, and above all, improving the possibilities of control and verification and increasing our possibilities in this area. And also the contexts which develop, human contexts which develop at the same time are equally important. Thank you.
Well, you certainly sound encouraged, Dr. Velikov. We have a question now from Senator Chick Hecht of Nevada.
Thank you very much. In order to better understand our counterparts of the Supreme Soviet, let us ask a few questions which perhaps we can ask of you and you can ask of us. We have one set of laws in America, our Constitution, which we are now celebrating our 200th year. We have had an open society for 200 years. We try and study the Soviet philosophy, Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, who have embraced dialectical materialism along with Lenin, which has resulted in a closed society. Now, with Mr. Gorbachev, we find glasnost, which is an open society. Please explain to us, how are you abandoning Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Lenin? What is your philosophy at the present time?
Who will touch that with an 11-foot pole?
An interesting question, Deputy Tolkunov will answer.
That's what I thought you were going to say,
I must say that Karl Marx and Engels and Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, the founders of our state, they saw socialism as a society of developed democracy. Unfortunately, in our history, we had the pre-war period, the war period, the post-war period, when we were forced somewhat to pinch our democratic rights in order to manage to strike a blow against German fascism, which threatened all of mankind. And that doubtless had an effect on the development of society. But right now, in developing democracy and developing glasnost, we are basing ourselves fully, entirely, on those indications left to us by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. He stated, during the last years of his life, that socialism is unthinkable without the broadest possible democracy. Glasnost. And even during the years of the Civil War, if you read Pravda, the newspaper Pravda and Izvestia, take a look at them. It dominated. That is why we, in developing what was in the foundation of Marx's and Engels and Lenin's teaching, we're developing that now.
Well, judging by what we've heard, the Congress, at least the Senate, has very seriously studied Marxism and Leninism. And this gives us some optimism, I must say, that you will better understand our position, particularly how our democracy is developing. But we have a question from the audience, please.
Today, during our discussion, we have not taken one aspect of this question. For example, the participation of our community to create the different image of our enemy. We're trying to create this Spacebridge, trying to reproach each other now, but we need to build trust. When we talk about contacts between each other, we have some experience in this area. And American participants and the Soviet participants of trips in Volga, Mississippi rivers, and mutual concerts that we had, one of which was on the 4th of July. Was a mutual concert, and there were many prominent ensembles during that concert. But the most important thing is that during these meetings, there are new proposals that come out, new initiatives. For example, an idea, which is now being supported almost on every continent, is that on the 24th of October, on the first day of the week of the disarmament, so that we should organize this wave of peace, which will begin in Hiroshima, in Japan. The bell will ring, and then all the bells will ring until they ring in California, where it'll end. It'll be different in each different country. There'll be manifestations, there'll be street marches, and it would be good if during that time all military action in the world would be stopped.
Leonid, what's the question?
And all of this is to prevent the war. So my question is, what do you think is the role of the anti-war movement? Do we create mutual trust? And how you, as legislators in the United States, how do you treat this particular initiative? For example, if governments would take part in this, then that would enhance.
Thank you, and Deputy Fidosov, the question has been asked, now answered.
Perhaps Congressman Espen would like to take a
well,
shot at that.
I think that we in this country, of course, have had a great deal more experience with anti-war protests and demonstrations than the Soviet Union has. We've had an open society and a freedom to express political views, which we are celebrating in the 200th anniversary of the Constitution. And protesting and demonstrating and free speech and stating our position is a long American tradition. And so we have had demonstrations on the issue of peace, on the issue of nuclear war, on the issue of U.S. and foreign policy involvements of one kind or another. It would be I think, very, very useful if a similar kind of freedom existed in the Soviet Union, and people there could demonstrate against the war in Afghanistan, if they felt that way, as people in this country feel about demonstrating about American foreign policy issues. And if that were to occur, I think it would have a beneficial effect on the cooperation of the two countries. But I think in order for that to work and to be productive and to be fruitful, I think the ability of the anti-war demonstrators has to have equal access in both countries.
Leonid, in just a second, you're going to hear a question from one of America's feistiest and most distinguished Congressman, Claude Pepper from Florida. But before that, I have a question for you, which I'd like you to answer from your heart. In the very beginning of this program, in this video you prepared, you cited the American dropping the atomic bomb on Japan at the end of World War II. Your questioner has just mentioned striking the peace bell in Japan. Do you really believe, as a Soviet citizen, that because this country dropped the bomb more than 40 years ago, that the United States would attack you with nuclear weapons in this era?
A rather unexpected question. Would any...
No, Leonid, I want you to answer the question.
That the United States...
Specific to me, in that case, I will have to make a slight correction. The fact is that, in fact, this Roland did speak about the nuclear bombing of Japan by the United States in 1945. But nothing was said about the peace bell in Japan, although, of course, it exists, and as you know, it has been it is set up in the unhappy memory of this bombing. As far as the United States is concerning the United States using nuclear weapons in Europe, I hope this will never occur. When now a great degree of agreement has been reached on to strike nuclear weapons in Western Europe. Although I'm not a great specialist in this matter, I would like to repeat that I would like to regard this optimistically.
Congressman Pepper from Florida.
Yes, Evgeny Pavlovich.
Mr. Chairman, sensible men wonder, how did this arms race begin between the Soviet Union and the United States ever get underway? The United States has not had a record of going around over the world attacking people and taking their countries away from them. We had a monopoly on the atom bomb for a good many years. We didn't threaten the Soviet Union or anybody else. We offered to internationalize nuclear power, and the Soviet Union didn't accept that offer. We are on opposite sides of the world almost from each other. The Soviet Union has about 275 million people. We have about 240 million people. We've got a great country. They've got a great country. We don't want that country. It's too cold for a lot of us over there. We had it. We don't want your great country. We're going to keep ours, of course. Here, all these thousands of warheads against each other. Why would be silly enough to think that we would attack them, or why should we think they would attack us? And don't we know that other nations are already getting nuclear weapons, and the number will grow among other nations of the world? And if we keep on the race against each other, it can't go anywhere but up, costs more and more. We can't afford the $300 billion a year we're spending. I imagine the Soviet Union can't afford it either. Now, maybe this is the beginning of a sensible period between allies, friends. We fought together, except for a little intrusion on our part during your revolution. We've never threatened your country. For 200 years, we've been friends. And I'm just hoping that the common sense of our two people, we are basically friendly people. We like each other. We're very much alike in many respects. And I think the time has come for both of us to come under the scrutiny of common sense and get down to business about stopping this nuclear arms race and getting back to a sensible, friendly relationship. Isn't that possible?
Congressman Pepper, thank you.
As you see, Peter, this a statement by the senior American congressman who was recently a guest in the Soviet Union and who was with Mr. Roosevelt, also caused applause in our audience. Evgeny Pavlovich?
I wanted to add to your answer. Of course, we now feel that hardly any sensible, we're not really worried that any deliberate actions would lead to a nuclear war. But, of course, the fact that the Secretary of Defense of the United States more than once has said that the purpose of the American defense policy is to return to precisely the situation which the United States had at the end of the 1940s and beginning of the 1950s, namely a nuclear monopoly. This, of course, scares us a little bit and puts us on guard and leads to a lack of confidence in you. Therefore, it seems to me that indeed we should apply all our efforts to disseminate.
Thank you, Evgeny Pavlovich. Yes, Lev Nikolaevich, our time is reaching its end.
I have a question for Senator Nunn. In 1983, President Reagan, in talking about SDI and in declaring SDI, asserted that it would make nuclear arms senseless. And right now, in political circles and military circles in the US, what is being talked about are statements that nuclear weapons will be maintained and that some components will even be stepped up. What is your attitude on the whole toward SDI? Do you see a space system, in fact, does it in fact allow you to protect your peoples from a retaliation strike?
I'll try to make this very brief, and this would probably take a half hour to give you my full opinion on SDI, but I've never agreed with the President's description of a perfect population protection that would allow us to all destroy nuclear weapons on both sides and have nothing but defense. I think the proliferation of nuclear knowledge goes too far for that, and I also believe that it would be almost impossible to verify. I do believe that research in the SDI area is important because at some point in the future, perhaps both sides would want to have a way of preventing an attack by a third party or by a terrorist group, or by accident. And we may want fail-safes on our missiles at some point in the future. I think Congressman Pepper made the point of mutual interest. I think we do have a mutual interest, and I think we ought to call attention to one positive development last week when your foreign minister was here, where they sat down and they signed a risk reduction effort. Now, without getting into the details on that, suffice it to say that that is a recognition that the United States and the Soviet Union have a mutual interest in preventing a war by accident or miscalculation. This is a small step in the right direction, but there are many more things we can do, and at some point we may scratch our heads and say, look, we've got 10,000 strategic weapons pointing at each other. What happens if a third country attacks one of the other superpowers? Or what happens if a terrorist group carries out a clandestine attack and fakes the attack as if a superpower has attacked the other one? Do we have the ability to detect the origin of a nuclear strike? If you think about it very seriously, we have a stake in you being able to recognize the origin of a nuclear attack. You have a stake in our own technology and our ability to recognize that. So there are mutual interests, even though sometimes those mutual interests are not easy to surface. And I think we've got to continue the search for those in a very diligent fashion.
Leonid, can I just add very briefly to what Senator Nunn said, because I regret to say we have come very close to the end of this program. There are people in this country who study your country, who believe that with the signing of the reduction, the agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union to eliminate the intermediate range weapons, that perhaps the two countries have come to the end of the strategic arms nuclear weapons race. Perhaps that is something for another opportunity on Capital to Capital. I'm not sure whether you're heartened by everything which was said this evening. I must confess I heard more pessimism than optimism, but perhaps the fact that we did it was reason for optimism. Thank you for joining us.
I'm not inclined to share your viewpoint, Peter. I think that what you call pessimistic comments were simply, unfortunately, recording actual realities. But let us hope that the conclusion of this bridge will be an optimistic one. Basically, we agree that as a result of having noted these realities, having seen them and analyzed them, we will all conclude that the situation has to change, and, of course, the members of Congress and the deputies of the Supreme Soviet can play an extremely and perhaps even decisive part. And before we conclude our program, I should like to call once again on Deputy Tolkunov, who has a specific proposal to make precisely on ways and means of overcoming our mutual claims against each other, overcoming mutual suspicions, and to improve relationships between our countries.
I wanted to remind the distinguished congressman of the fact that the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR on the 21st of June 1986, that is more than a year ago, proposed to its counterpart in Congress that it hold a working meeting of the committees to discuss topics of common concern to Soviet and American parliamentarians in connection with the Soviet-American agreement on the reductions of strategic weapons and also on the questions of the cessation of nuclear tests. The statement of the Commission said that scientific, technological progress here is spurring us on in this area. And as a possible step, there could be discussion of agreement, for example, on holding meetings of the committee on questions with inviting experts to join them. If there will be a delay in answer to this, then it would be possible to get in contact with representatives of Congress and of the Supreme Soviet on the radio phones which are linking us. That's not being listened to by anybody else. And then we could come to concrete agreements on such agreements for the Commissions on Foreign Affairs.
Well, Leonid, we thank you for this last-minute proposal, which we think it is a proposal, or at least the reaffirmation of a proposal. And am I assured that the congressman and the senator will think diligently on what has been said?
I think it's an interesting suggestion. I must say that I participated in that kind of seminar at the Carter Library with Dr. Velikov, and he did an excellent job along with Ambassador Dobrynin in presenting the Soviet point of view. And actually, President Ford and President Carter and the ambassador and Dr. Velikov all got together and sat around the table, and we issued a communique out of that conference. So this kind of dialogue can be very helpful for our two countries.
Okay. Leonid, thank you very much for that proposal. You have an advantage on us in that it is mid-morning for you in the Soviet Union now. It is 1:30 in the morning, that is to say an hour and a half after midnight here in the United States, and I think perhaps our audience, as interesting as they may have found this, would like to go to bed. Thank you very much for joining us. So if you'll say goodnight to your audience, your television audience in the Soviet Union, we'll say goodnight to our television audience here.
I should like to thank those who took part in the discussion on the American side, those who participated on the Russian-Soviet side, and finally, at the end of our talk, to quote the words from the article made by Mr. Gorbachev, which you just referred to. He said in this article, why are we raising the question about a comprehensive system of international security? Because it's impossible to acquiesce in a situation which we've been in for so many years, continuing tension, suspicion, and expending tremendous talent and money in order to increase mutual mistrust and fear. The heart of the problem is trust among peoples, respect for international agreements and institutes, and we are prepared to carry out a large-scale policy of confidence building which will gradually form a system of comprehensive security. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, Leonid. Good night. And now, before we say an absolute good night from here, a word of thanks to the technicians who made this evening possible, both here and in Moscow. It has been a complicated mix of pictures, audio, satellites, and so forth, and it has worked. And in a moment, you'll see just how many people made it work. Incidentally, as has been mentioned many more times this evening, or a number of times this evening, there are going to be 2 more of these capital-to-capital hookups between Washington and Moscow. October the 14th, human rights, and November the 18th, the regional issues, some of which we've touched on this evening. We hope you'll join us then. In the meantime, my thanks to the American panel. Congressman, Senator, we hope you'll join us the next time. For everyone at ABC News, I'm Peter Jennings. Good night from Washington.
This has been a presentation of ABC News.